final day of the 13th edition of the Z Jaipur Literature Festival in association with Nexa at Charbagh. Before we begin, we'd like to thank our generous sponsors. Starting with Z, our title partner. Please go to Z's stall for author book signing. Nexa, the associate partner and venue partner Front Lawn. Bank of Baroda, venue partner Bethak. Motwani Jadeja Foundation, venue partner Darbar Hall. Rajasthan Tourism, tourism partner. The JCB Prize for Literature Book Festival Bookstore managed by Full Circle. Aga Khan Foundation, our series partner. Reckitt Benckiser, the official cause partner. Diageo, our celebration partner. AirAsia, our travel partner. Kingfisher, our good times partner. Red FM, official radio partner. Lonchora, podcast partner. Facebook, community partner. Be Live, webcast partner. UFO Movies, Cinemedia partner. Save the Children, book launch. Pratham Books, outreach partner. Our series partner, the North India Office, US Embassy, New Delhi, and Mahindra World City, Jaipur. Our session partners, British Council, Netflix, Etsy, Public Health Engineering Department, United Nations India, Avid Learning, Murthy Classical Library of India of Harvard University Press, Australian High Commission and Australia Council for the Arts, Paras Biltech, Sahitya Akademi, Centre for Policy Research. Our media partners Dainik Bhaskar, Rajasthan Patrika, Amar Ujala, Business Standard, Inox, Mathrubhumi, Outlook Magazine, The New Indian Express and The Tribune. Jen Mikalski, Zomato, DLF, Penguin Random House, Jayashree Perwal International School, Citibank, Storytel, CK Birla Hospital, LIC, India Sotheby's International Realty, SBI, John L. Bizzell Foundation, JW Marriott, Airtel, Karma Kettle, Grover Zampa, Coca-Cola, Gulmohar Lane, Hotel Diggi Palace, Taj Rambagh Palace, Clark Samer, Royal Opera House, Mumbai, The Lalit, Full Circle, Yuva Ekta Foundation, Royal Treasure, Event Board, Edelman, Social Connect, McCain, Unibic, Wagbakri Tea, Mastkin, Kanha Sweets, and Be Live. We are delighted to introduce our very first session for the day, session 167, Big Sister, Little Sister, Three Women at the Heart of the 20th Century China, presented by The Tribune. We request you to kindly turn your phones on silent mode, and please join me in welcoming Jung Chang, author of bestsellers like Wild Swans, Three Daughters of China, Mao, The Unknown Story, and the recipient of several awards, including the UK Writers Guild Best Non-Fiction and the Book of the Year UK, who's going to be in conversation with Frank Dikötter, author of a dozen books on modern China, including Mao's Great Famine, and the winner of the Samuel Johnson Prize for Non-Fiction in 2011. Let's hear it for both of them.
Ladies and gentlemen, you are here for Jung, and she's going to speak about her book with a number of slides. So, Jung, up to you.
Well, hello. Well, I think before I get on to Big Sister, Little Sister, Red Sister, Three Women at the Heart of 20th Century China, I'd just like to say a few words about how I became a writer. I loved writing when I was a child, but when I was growing up in China in the 1950s, 60s, and the 70s, it was impossible even to dream of becoming a writer. Because in those days, writing was the most dangerous profession. Nearly all writers were condemned, sent to the gulag, driven to suicide. Some were even executed. And writing for oneself was dangerous. I remember writing my first poem on my 16th birthday in 1968. It was in the Cultural Revolution. And when I was lying in bed polishing my poem, I heard the door banging. The Red Guards had come to raid our flat, and I had to quickly rush to the bathroom to tear up my poem and flush it down the toilet. And that ended my first venture in writing. But the desire to write never left me. And in the following years, I was exiled to the edge of the Himalayas and worked as a peasant, and then as a steel worker, and then electrician. And when I was spreading manure in the paddy fields, and when I was checking electricity supplies on top of the electricity poles, and I was always writing in my head with an imaginary pen, but I couldn't put pen to paper. Then in 1976, Mao died, and China began to change. In 1978, I became one of the first group of Chinese to go and study in Britain. And when I arrived in Britain, and Britain was like another planet. Everything was new, and there were 14 of us in a group, and we were not allowed to go out on our own. We were still wearing the Mao suit, the blue kind of uniform thing, and we were quite a sight in the London streets. So life was exciting. And I just wanted to spend every minute soaking up this new world. So I didn't want to write. The desire to write left me. And to write would be for me to look backward and inward into a past I wanted to forget all about. Because my father died in the Cultural Revolution. My grandmother, beloved grandmother who brought us up, died in the Cultural Revolution, and I just wanted to forget about the past. But in 1988, my mother came to stay with me, and for the first time, she told me the stories of her life and stories of my grandmother. And once my mother started, she couldn't stop. And she talked every day. She stayed with me for 6 months. And she talked every day and talked into a tape recorder when I was out working. And so by the time she left London, she had left me 60 hours of tape recordings. And so I started Wild Swans. And that began my career as a writer, and I finally became a writer. Now this book, The Three Sisters from Shanghai in China, is my latest book. Now, here is their story in 15, 20 minutes. The lady sitting in the middle is their mother. She came from the oldest Christian family in China. And a district in Shanghai is named after her ancestor, who became a Christian in the 17th century. And next one is Charlie Song, their father. He also had a very interesting experience. She went to America as a sort of a coolie, unskilled worker. But he ran away and ended up in the American South. And he was converted as a Methodist. He was the first Chinese to have been converted by the American Southern Methodists. And after spending 7 years in America, he went back to China as a preacher. But he later went into business and made a lot of money. And with the money, he most wanted to give his children an American education. So he sent his 3 daughters as well as 3 sons for education in America. Big sister Ling went to America in 1904, and she was 14, and she was the first Chinese woman to be educated in the West. Now, the lady there is his second daughter. After studying in America, she returned to China, and she fell in love passionately with Sun Yat-Sen, the so-called father of China. Sun Yat-Sen was the first man to promote republicanism. And Ling married him. She was passionately in love with him. She wanted to die for him. But her parents were furiously against the marriage because Sun Yat-Sen was many, many years older, as you can see, more than twice of her age. And he was already married. He had 3 children. He had concubines. And he was basically a womanizer. So Ling's parents locked her up in her bedroom in their house upstairs, but she climbed out of the window and boarded a ship from Shanghai to go to Japan to join him. But she was hugely let down. And in 1922, the couple was surrounded by Sun Yat-sen's political enemies, and Ling offered to stay behind to cover his escape. So he fled. But what she didn't know was when he arrived in safety, he still didn't want her to escape. He wanted her as a bait to stay put so his enemies could launch an attack, to give him an excuse to launch a counterattack from the outside for his political goals. And she nearly died. She had a hellish flee of 2 days and 2 nights, and she lost her child. And she was told she could never have children. And this was devastating to her, and her love for Sun Yat-sen died. But she was not going to divorce him, and instead she decided she wanted to do deals with him. And the deal was that she wanted to be a political figure in her own right, which she had not been able to do. And here she is standing on the platform for the opening ceremony of the Wangpo Military Academy. Next to her is Sun Yat-sen, and next to Sun Yat-sen is Chiang Kai-shek, the head of the military academy, and Sun's man to control his army. Now, Sun Yat-sen, for his goal of overthrowing the Beijing government, for himself to become the president of China, he brought in the Russians, and the Russians built him an army, supplied him with arms, and built this military academy for him. And but Sun Yat-sen died in 1925, and Chiang Kai-shek broke from the Russians. The 3 sisters then were torn apart by their political beliefs. Red sister Ling, sitting there in the dark Cheongshan, was the red sister, and she'd been converted to Leninism. So she went with the communists. And the big sister sitting there, and little sister then with Chiang Kai-shek. And this is the last happy pictures they took together in 1927. Little sister Mei Ling then married Chiang Kai-shek in December 1927, and this is their wedding photograph. And this is the couple on their honeymoon. But Mei Ling soon sank into a depression because life with Chiang Kai-shek was not what she had expected. Chiang Kai-shek basically had started his political career as an assassin. He had assassinated Sun Yat-sen's main political rival, and that's how he caught the eye of Sun Yat-sen and rose to become Sun's successor. And as a result, he was pursued by assassins himself, and some got into their bedroom. And as Mei Ling, little sister Mei Ling, as a result, suffered a miscarriage herself and was unable to have her children. And so she was in a depression for 7 years. And Chiang Kai-shek loved his wife and wanted to pull her out of depression. In 1932, he gave her a necklace as a present, as a birthday present. But it was no ordinary necklace. And as you can see, it's a necklace that encircled a whole mountain. The gem of the necklace is a palace. It's actually called the Mei Ling Palace. It's got a blue-green glass top, which sparkled in the sun, looking like a real gem. And the chains were French pine trees, which he had imported. And these foreign trees color in autumn in a different way from the local trees. So they stand out like a real necklace. Big sister Ling was passionately anti-communist. She made the marriage for her little sister and Chiang Kai-shek. And as a result, she was able to make her husband the prime minister of China. And she became one of the richest women in China. And this is my big sister with her husband, H.H. Kong. Now, meanwhile, Red Sister Qingling went into exile in Russia. And here she is in the Caucasus with her friends. Next to her left, is a man called Deng Yanda, who was a very smart man with leadership qualities. Stalin had wanted to make him the leader of the Chinese Communist Party, but he refused. He said he wasn't even a communist. And so he fled to Berlin, and Qingling followed him there. The couple fell in love. And Deng Yanda then went back to China to form a third party, separate from the communists and the nationalists. And he became a threat for Chiang Kai-shek. And Chiang Kai-shek had him murdered in 1932, sorry. And so, of course, Red Sister hated Chiang Kai-shek for personal as well as ideological reasons. Now, when the war against Japan started in 1937, and the country was briefly reunited, little sister Mei Ling became the wartime first lady. Here she is visiting wounded soldiers. And she toured America in a triumphant tour in 1943. Here she is addressing Congress. And the standing ovation lasted 6 minutes. And she is here with a bouquet at the Hollywood Bowl. And the welcoming crowds was 30,000. The man next to her right is her nephew, David, Big Sister Eiling's son. And Big Sister basically gave 2 of her children, two little sister, to fill the gap of not being able to have her children. And the person to the other far end is her niece, Jeanette. Jeanette was gay. And unusually for her time, she didn't try to hide it. She flaunted it by always wearing men's clothes and men's haircut. And while in America, President Roosevelt addressed her as my boy. And the Chiang Kai-shek and little sister Mei Ling at Cairo conference with Roosevelt and Winston Churchill. And when the sisters got together in the sort of united front, Qing Ling made sure she always stood apart from the others, and she never smiled when Chiang Kai-shek was there. Oh, this is the three brothers and their wives. We'll skip them. After the defeat of Japan, Chiang Kai-shek's portrait was on Tiananmen Gate, where Mao's portrait today is near where Mao's portrait is today. But in the civil war that went after the defeat of the Japan between the communists and Chiang Kai-shek's nationalists, he was defeated. This was the picture of him leaving his ancestral home to flee to Taiwan. And the man to his right with a cap and a gun is his son, Qing Guo. Qing Guo was held hostage in Russia by Stalin for 12 years. And Chiang Kai-shek was desperate to get his son back. So he offered a deal to Stalin. He traded the survival of the Chinese communists for the return of his son. And at a time when he could have wiped out the Red Army, he let them go. And this was the Long March in the 1930s. So as a result, his son came back, but he was defeated eventually by the communists and driven to Taiwan. After he died in 1975, Qing Guo changed his father's legacies and put Taiwan on the road to democracy, which Taiwan is today. And Qing Ling, red sister, the shortest with sunglasses, became Mao's vice chair. And here she is standing on Tiananmen Gate with Mao and Zhou Enlai, the prime minister, to her right. And she is at the Mao's memorial service in 1976. You may notice these gaps in the lineup of the leaders. And this was because when the memorial service took place, the Gang of Four, led by Mao's wife, were still there. But by the time the picture was published, they had gone to prison. And so the editor couldn't do anything else but to remove these figures from the picture. You may wonder what Elvis is doing with the three sisters. Well, the lady he was holding is Deborah Paget, a Hollywood star who was the lead lady in Elvis's first film, Love Me Tender. Apparently, Elvis proposed to her, but she turned down the king to marry Eileen's son. And you may wonder what I was doing. Well, I was wearing the same clothes. And anyway, I was with Deborah. I was interviewing Deborah in her place outside Texas with Deborah's son, Gregory. Gregory is the only descendant of the three illustrious sisters. Now, little sister Mei Ling died just the other day in 2003, aged 105. She had lived to see 3 centuries. Okay, thank you very much.
A wonderful book, a triumph of historical research and storytelling. And I always think of the 4 books you've written as a sort of symphony in 4 movements. It starts with Wild Swans, which sold millions and millions, I think something like 18 million copies, translated into 40 languages, and on 3 generations of women. Then your second book goes on a very bad man called Mao, and you destroy him very effectively based on great extensive research. And then the third book is on a woman who was considered to be bad, but you show that she was actually quite good, the Empress Dowager Cixi. And then in the fourth movement, you come back to 3 women, except they belong to the same generation. It's an extraordinarily elegant. You are a gifted historian and a true storyteller. And these two rarely come together, and you've managed to reach a huge audience, making China understandable to literally tens of millions of people. Now, I am a historian, as you know, and I'm only struggling to be a storyteller. So I would like to ask you a question that I always hope people will ask me. There's always great joy as a historian to carry out the research. You get lost in libraries, in archives. You have interviews with people you've never met before. This book is based on a great many interviews, but also very extensive research in archives in Taiwan, in Europe, in the United States. So my question really is, adventures in the archives. What were the key moments where you just saw something you'd never seen before? The joy of engagement with primary material. Tell us something about that.
Well, I loved research, which is why I chose to write these biographies, because, I know you loved archives and that we share this passion for archive research. The book about the 3 sisters is actually the easiest to research, partly because most of the archives are in America and in Taiwan, which is a democracy now and has opened its archives, and even in Britain. Sun Yat-Sen had launched his political career in Britain by staging a fake kidnap in the Chinese embassy in London. And then he became the only Republican to have an international profile. So that was riveting, working in the Kew archives, and also in the archives of the then Prime Minister Lord Salisbury. Relative to my previous books, this book took the shortest time. It's only 5 years, I think. Because a lot of the research, it was parallel, overlapped with my previous research when I was writing the biography of Empress Dowager Cixi, and particularly when I was writing the biography of Mao. And the biography of Mao was the most difficult to research. It took my husband and me 12 years of really hard work to research that book in the 1990s. And may I just say something about my research with my husband, Jon Halliday. For the Mao biography, though, but of course a lot of materials then are used for this 3 Sisters book. Jon and I divided our research by language. And because I'm Chinese, so I dealt with the Chinese language sources. And Jon, who's half English, half Irish, unfortunately speaks many languages. So he was landed with the rest of the world. And in particular, he knows Russian and spent years working in the Russian archives, which turned out to be a treasure trove. This was the 1990s, Yeltsin's time. And in China, I interviewed, over 200 people who were close to Mao. Now, we traveled all over the world, interviewing everyone who had interesting dealings with Mao. And one person we interviewed was Imelda Marcos, the former Filipino first lady who had thousands of pairs of shoes. And it was actually thanks to Imelda's visit and her relationship with Mao that I got to wear my first skirt when I was an adult. Because when the Cultural Revolution started in 1966, and I was 14, and we were not allowed to wear skirts. Red guards stood on the street to cut up anyone's skirt. But then in 1974, Imelda visited China wearing this glorious Filipino national dress, which made Madame Mao very jealous, because Madame Mao also could only wear this Mao suit, very unbecoming. And she saw that Mao was kissing Imelda's hand in a rapt way, and she was very jealous. And she then decided to design a national dress for Chinese women. And the dress she designed was absolutely no good. And even skirt-thirst Chinese women universally shunned it, because it was even more unbecoming than the uniform. But the taboo was lifted, so we were able to wear skirts. And when we met Imelda Marcos was batting her eyes furiously at John, my John, and he said to me, he said, "I don't think Western men understand us Eastern women." So John said, "Have you come across any Western men who understand you?" And she said, "Only one person, Richard Nixon." We also, there is another story I can't really telling, which is how we got to interview Mobutu, you know, the tyrant of Zaire, now Congo. And we were in the hotel in Hong Kong after a month interviews in China. John was in the bathroom reading his morning paper. He suddenly yelled, "Guess who is in this hotel? It's a Mobutu. Shall we try to find somebody to introduce us?" And I said, "Oh, John, I'm exhausted. I've done 2-month interviews. I'm going to the hair salon." So I went to the hair salon, and 10 minutes later, who but Mobutu strutted in. And he was like where the stand is, and he was under this hair thing. He had the bits of towels around his neck and bits of towels around his head, cotton wools around his neck, and he was trapped. So I was able to approach him and ask him for an interview, and that's how we got it. So these were just some tremendous funs we had in those 12 hard-working years.
Superb storytelling, and of course, superb first-rate historical research. You're one of the finest historians of modern China, but also a great storyteller, as we just heard. So can you tell us something about you as a writer? How do you write? Do you have a word count? Do you write in the morning? Do you do your chapters chronologically? Tell us something about your daily writing routines.
Well, I think writing is my passion and has been my passion from a child. So I don't need any incentives. I don't need coffees to wake me up. And I got up not early, but I mean, as soon as, basically I use every minute I have to write and enjoy it tremendously. I mean, for example, I'm at the moment translating the Three Sisters book into Chinese. And basically, I have to translate all my books into Chinese, so I write all my books twice. I don't know whether this is fortunate or not fortunate. And so if I'm not here doing a session, I'll be back in the hotel doing my writing. So I write to the evening. And in the days when John and I were writing the biography of Mao, we were in the house every day, all the time. We had our lunches and dinners, not breakfast, but lunch and dinners together all the time. And he would be in his study, I in my study. And at lunchtime, we would come together and we would exchange our discoveries from the Russian archives and from the Chinese primary sources. And I built all my stories on primary sources. And I'm sure that's the same with you. I mean, I just feel very pleased that, that we have this in common. I don't have a plot in my head. I don't rely on secondary sources. And I go to secondary sources only because they contain primary materials which I can't get from the archives, let's say. And so the stories are built that way. And the stories, you know, as we say, in truth is stranger than fiction. You can't stretch your imagination and make up the stories like the Song sisters. So that's basically how I write.
Superb. I think it's called evidence-driven research. You'd be surprised how many historians are actually not all that interested in the evidence. Always comes as a surprise to me, certainly in the China field. Let me ask you a last question before we open it up to the audience. And that's about Sun Yat-Sen. You explain that you set out to write a biography of him. He's seen as the father of the nation. He's revered in the People's Republic of China. He's revered by some in Taiwan, and of course also by some overseas with statues in Vancouver, San Francisco, Melbourne, and of course in Hong Kong, where I live. So he's one of the great male figures of the 20th century, although there isn't really a true biography around. So you explained that you set off to research him, but ended up writing about the three sisters because they were so much more interesting and so much more complex. But in the end, I think you've actually achieved something others haven't done. You've come up with a very truthful portrait of Sun Yat-Sen, and may I say, a comprehensive and rather scathing critique of this man. So I think in the end you have succeeded in writing also a biography of Sun Yat-Sen. Tell us something about him.
Yes. Well, Sun Yat-sen is called the father of China. He was the first man to promote republicanism. And I discovered that he actually picked up the idea of republicanism in Hawaii, where his family had gone as a poor peasant immigrant. And so he was there as a child, and then he went back there as a youth. And at that time, Hawaii, the second time he went to Hawaii, Hawaii had just become a republic. And so everybody was talking about the republic and republics. The royalists were defending their queen, and the Republicans were preparing for counterattack. And then Sun Yat-sen, who was a radical against the reigning monarchy, the Manchus, it suddenly hit him that China too could become a republic. I mean, at that time, republicanism was completely new in China. So he was the first man to have got this idea, which of course made him the first man of the republic and the father of China. And I originally wanted to write a biography of him, as you say. But as I gathered a lot of materials, then I got bored with him, because he was like a mini Mao. I said mini Mao simply because he died young, not so young, but died early, 1925, before he came to power and before he could done more damage to China. Well, more damage. He'd already done tremendous damage because he was the one who brought Soviet Russians into China. And then he was power-driven. That's what all he wanted to do. He was prepared to sacrifice anyone, his adoring wife who was going to sacrifice herself for him, a wife he also loved. And then I felt, I don't want to write another half biography of Mao. But in the meantime, Sun Yat-sen's wife and her sisters emerged as people that really fascinated me because they had many sides to them. Sorry, they were political, but they also had many sides, and so that I ended up writing about them. Now, the Chinese are desperately needing heroes, as is the case with a lot of authoritarian dictatorships. And so Mao is not a hero. Chiang Kai-shek is no longer a hero. And so people latched on Sun Yat-sen because they still know very little about him. But really, the real hero or heroine of modern China must be Empress Dowager Cixi. And she was the woman who banned foot binding, the the torture that tortured my grandmother and Chinese women for 1,000 years. She banned death by 1,000 cuts, and she ruled China on and off for half a century, from 1861 to 1908, when she died. She was the person who brought China into the modern age. And her last project was to turn China into a constitutional monarchy with an elected parliament, an independent legal system. It had a free press, and etc. And she had made a program for that before she died. Now, then after she died, as I discovered researching this book, for the next nearly 2 decades, China was actually a functioning democracy. And there was an elected president. The presidents were elected once 5 years. The first one, Yuan Shikai, 1913. The second one, Xu Shichang, 1918. And the third one, Cao Kun, 1923. And there were problems, bribery with the Cao case. But there was an election, a general election. There was a functioning parliament with riveting debate. There was a complete free press and freedom of expression, and the legal system that was becoming, was working towards being more improving itself. And there were warlords. Well, the warlords were terms given to these people later, basically provincial chiefs who also had the control of the army. And that system had started from the Manchu dynasty. And in the country that was, rather loosely but freely governed, these provincial chiefs had more power. But and then this occasion they fought each other very briefly. The most famous warlords fightings lasted a few days or a week. And also, above all, these warlords were all committed to democracy. And they all wanted to preserve the democratic system. And Sun Yat-sen, followed by Chiang Kai-shek, was the man who really set up a separate state, split from the central government, Beijing government, that had been democratically elected and internationally recognized. His wars were the longest, lasting from 1913 to 1928. Throughout this period of democracy. And after he died, Chiang Kai-shek defeated Beijing with the help of the Soviet Russians. And it was Chiang Kai-shek who established a dictatorship which Mao inherited. I mean, actually, Chiang Kai-shek and Sun Yat-sen were the people who had ended China's pursuit to democracy. Well, I was Sun Yat-sen, yeah. So, okay, that's, I mean, I'm very pleased with discovery myself, because those first 2 decades of China's history had been in a mess. Nobody quite understand what it was about. And that was because Chiang Kai-shek and Mao are all, and post-Mao, they're all in the business to cover up, to try to sweep this period of democracy away under the carpet and so on, so nobody would know that the Chinese are actually very capable for democratic rule.
In other words, Sun Yat-sen was an obstacle to democracy. One of the great things about your books is that they always manage to upset the right people. We have about 15 minutes. Can we have questions from the audience? But please, no long comments, just short questions. Would you like to take them one by one?
Yes.
There goes the microphone.
Hello, I'm Charles Dodson. I'm an Australian journalist. I've read all your books. I love them all. Thank you very much. My question is just the Sung sisters, their relevance today in modern China, Taiwan, in the Chinese diaspora. What is the relevance of the Sung sisters today?
What is the relevance? Well, it's absolutely huge, because 2 of the Song sisters were driven out of mainland China when the communists took power in 1949. And little sister Mei Ling then became the first lady of Taiwan. And meanwhile, Red sister Qing Ling stayed in the mainland and became Mao's vice chair. And she supported and worked for the communist government until her last breath. And when she died, she was made the honorary chairman of China, of Red China. So, of course, Beijing has always been trying to use Qing Ling as their main weapon to lure Taiwan back into the fold, into communist rule. So they were very nice to her. I mean, in the Cultural Revolution, nearly everybody suffered appallingly. I mean, but Red sister Qing Ling was spared, and simply because she had connections in Taiwan. Her sisters were in Taiwan, and Taiwan's first lady, little sister Mei Ling. And one interesting thing about Qing Ling was, because, as I said earlier, she couldn't have children. So she always felt this pain, this void in her family. She wasn't able to be a mother. So in her later age, in her late 60s, she adopted 2 daughters of her chief bodyguard, with whom she was alleged to have had an affair. But of course they didn't. I did my research. I interviewed the deputy of this chief bodyguard. Anyway, now, so she adopted these 2 girls, and they were very close to her. They were like her real daughters. But when she died, these 2 girls were not allowed to be counted as her family. Whereas Beijing sent invitations to everybody in Taiwan, Qingguo, little sister Mei Ling, big sister had died by then, and all the family to come back to see your relatives for the last time and so on. But the real thing is, of course, to try to cultivate the relations with Taiwan, so Taiwan could one day go back to mainland China. But these two adopted daughters, who were very close to Red Sister, were nowhere to be seen. They were unmentionable, even today. I mean, there was a time they were briefly mentionable, but then quickly became unmentionable because they were not Songs. They were not the family. They had no connection with Taiwan, and they were useless. Qingling was going to leave them all sorts of things in her will, but they didn't get any except money, some money. So Taiwan stood in the center of the three sisters. And little sister Mei Ling is a sort of kind person, but she's unfazed by death, but she can't stand discomfort. And she was actually addicted to a presidential lifestyle. And when she was in Taiwan, she had a wild time with Chiang Kai-shek. They had much better lives than in the mainland, because in the mainland there were assassins, opposition, and so on, and Japanese invasion. But in Taiwan, Chiang Kai-shek had tight control. And so Chiang Kai-shek sealed off Taiwan's coastlines and the mountains. So nobody allowed to go have a picnic in the hills, and nobody allowed to go into the sea to have a swim. And all that beauty, all those beauty spots were exclusively theirs. And Chiang Kai-shek and Mei Ling had 30 villas in Hong Kong, in Taiwan, and they were they had monopoly of this beauty of beautiful landscape, until, of course, Chiang died, and Qingguo, the former hostage in Russia, put Taiwan on the road to democracy, and these things are all opened. Open to the public. And Mei Ling, little sister, then went and settled in New York. She didn't like Taiwan. She wanted to stay in New York. But she also brought a large staff from Taiwan to New York, and her staff reached 37, incurring tremendous cost.
More questions, please. Over here. Right there in the middle.
I have a question which is not on your book, but a bit of trying to understand China. When you bunch of Indians get together, they look hugely argumentative, somewhat indisciplined, but not given to revolution. If I look at the Chinese, it's exactly the opposite. They don't look argumentative. They look highly disciplined, but they seem to be given to revolution, especially in the last couple of 100 years. I wonder whether you have an observation on this.
Well, when the Soviet Russians first wanted to foment revolutions in the world from 1919, their representative, one of their representatives in particular, who went under the pseudonym Marin, he was in India, and anyway, some of their representatives had been in India and then in China. They actually came to the conclusion that in India it was much easier to start a revolution than in China. In China, they couldn't start a revolution. But then, until, of course, they helped Sun Yat-sen build this army. And it was a military conquest. And it wasn't actually a revolution in terms of uprisings here and there at that time. Then actually Mao said communist revolution couldn't happen in China. It has to be brought in from the north by the Soviet Red Army. And Mao said this in 1923. And of course, I mean, this is exactly what happened. After the war against Japan, when the war against Japan ended, Soviet army invaded China from the north and the northeast and occupied a large part of China that is bigger than the entire territory they occupied in Europe. And it was through this military assistance, which is they helped Mao beat Chiang Kai-shek. So the Chinese Revolution, in both Chiang Kai-shek's case and Mao's case, were actually military victories.
More questions, please. Right there in the back.
Hello. So despite having such colorful, amazingly powerful women in Chinese history, why do we see almost no women being represented at the highest level in the leadership of China right now? Like right now, I can't even remember any name from the Chinese government at present of any powerful woman, whereas in Finland, Croatia, even India, like we have a lot of women in power.
Well, the three sisters came into prominence in the around 1920, when at that time China was a democracy. I mean, women's liberation had been started by Empress Dowager Cixi. In fact, back in 1903, people are saying in the newly free press that the 20th century will be the century of women's liberation. And the sisters were the product of that period. They were able to come to prominence, like many other women, actually, of that time. But the current atmosphere is not like that. Politics and who became the leader is through a secret process that we don't know. And I don't know. I think you're doing some research. So you next book, you probably know more than all of us. And we don't know who these top 5, 6, 7 people are, and how did they come up to top. And the women are not. They are not, if I may say, as a sweeping generalization. And in this kind of a competition, cutthroat politics, I think women, because I think they are less single-mindedly pursuing power or exclusion, they are very unlikely to come up on top. I mean, the woman, Empress Dowager Cixi, who did come up on top, but it's in the other biography. I mean, she had many other interests. She designed gardens. Her interest was much wider. She was not single-mindedly pursuing power, and which was why China also had troubles, because at various stages, she was forced out of power, and which she readily quit when her adopted son came of age, was supposed to take over. So what I make a long story short is this sort of a cutthroat politics is, I think, it's not, let's say, suited, or women are not suited to this cutthroat politics.
Lack of empathy is a great characteristic in a dictatorship if you want to go to the top. That's a male attribute, possibly. More questions? Did I see a question over here? No? We've only had men so far. Okay. Well, I'm trying to find some diversity.
Thank you. Good morning, ma'am. Ma'am, to my inquisitiveness, I would like to ask you that Chinese, what I understand, they have been very aggressive and hostile from Genghis Khan and till Mao. That entire region, even though there have been atrocities by Japanese over them, and in current scenario, there has been such things also, like in the trade war that is going on, or the aggression towards India, and their collaboration with the Pakistan. I'm not biased, but I just want to know about it, as you are well versed with the history. So why is it so that they are always trying to dominate the other nations, trying to expand, and instead of harmonizing?
I think, by the way, Genghis Khan is probably not regarded as Chinese. Yeah. So now I think. I think first of all, I don't think I agree with this sort of a generalization. I think it's not the Chinese who are trying to. It's at the moment. I mean, it really is the ideology of communism that is dominating the country. So I'm afraid I disagree with this sort of cultural generalization, and so I think, I mean, as for the China-India war in 1962, Zhang and I also did a lot of research, and which is in our biography of Mao. And we came to India, we interviewed Nehru's, people in Nehru's circle, his cabinet members, and Nehru's interpreter with Mao, who, by the way, spoke the most beautiful Chinese. And Zhou Enlai said he was the best Chinese language speaker among all foreigners he'd met. He died now. I mean, that it's not so simple. There were a lot of nationalistic feelings involved on India's side as well as on China's side. Yes, I think that's a rather long story.
Thank you very much. This is the end of our session. We have 30 seconds left for you to join me in thanking Jung. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We wish to thank Jung Chang, Frank Dikötter, and the Tribune for this very enriching session. Do note that the authors will be signing their books at the book signing desk located right at the entrance of Charbagh. Also, please help us in keeping the venue clean. Do carry your waste items with you and dispose them in the bins placed all across Diggy Palace. The next session at Charbagh is session 172, This Land is Our Land, the Gujarati experience of migration at home and abroad. The session would begin shortly. I request the audience to kindly occupy the front rows first and to put their phones on silent mode. Thank you.